Hello, my name is Astara. I wasn't supposed to find out, at least not like that. I thought I was bringing lunch to my pregnant sister. But instead, I found my husband's car at her gate, and I heard them whisper, "When she signs, we take it all." They weren't just lying, they were planning, mapping out my downfall like it was business. My family, my husband, together. I almost signed everything away, my inheritance, my home, my name, and the worst part? No one warned me, not even my mother. Have you ever been the last to realize your family had already moved on? Without you. What else were they willing to take? It was a Thursday, just another average, sun-washed Texas afternoon. The kind where the light settles soft on sidewalks, kids ride bikes past trimmed lawns, and sprinklers hiss as they fight the dry air. I had just left the grocery store with 2 paper bags buckled into the passenger seat beside me, filled with the kind of comfort food that only makes sense when you're feeding someone who's expecting. Vera, my sister, was 7 months pregnant. I figured chicken pot pie and those little peach tarts she used to love might brighten her day. Rowan had texted me that morning, saying he'd be in downtown Austin all day, something about a client lunch and then a meeting with the city planning office. So when I turned onto Vera's quiet cul-de-sac, the last thing I expected to see was his silver Acura parked right up against her gate. At first, my brain didn't compute it. I slowed the car and blinked hard. Maybe he loaned it to a friend. Maybe he dropped something off for her, some old boxes from our storage unit. But the car was off. No one was in it. And the passenger door was cracked slightly open, like someone had stepped out in a rush and forgot to close it behind them. I pulled over half a block away and killed the engine. My stomach turned, but my hands were steady on the wheel. I didn't call. I didn't want to hear Vera's voice filtered through Bluetooth. I needed to hear this for myself. I left the grocery bags behind and walked slowly down the sidewalk, my sandals catching bits of gravel. The sun was hot on the back of my neck. A cardinal chirped somewhere behind me, oblivious. Vera's front yard was shaded by a big oak tree. I crept up the side of the house, past the blooming hydrangeas she loved to photograph for Instagram. The living room window was open a few inches, just enough to let in the breeze, or a secret. I heard her voice first. "When she signs, we take it all." My breath caught. I froze mid-step. She won't even see it coming. The voice that responded was lower, familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. "She trusts you," Rowan said, casually, like they were talking about a dog. "She still thinks you're family." There was a soft laugh. "Vera's." My mind started splitting into pieces. They weren't talking about someone else. They were talking about me. I leaned slightly, just enough to peek through the sheer curtains. Vera was lounging on the couch, her legs curled under her, a tall glass of iced tea sweating on the table. Rowan stood nearby, flipping through a stack of papers. Her hand moved as she gestured, and I saw it, her engagement ring, the one I helped her pick out when she got engaged to her now ex-husband, still on her finger, shining in the light like it didn't carry a damn lie. I didn't make a sound. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I stepped back like the ground under me wasn't real anymore. My hands were shaking, but I managed to back away from the window, retracing my steps through the yard, each one heavier than the last. I didn't remember walking back to my car, only the sound of my pulse thudding in my ears. When I opened the door, the seat felt cold against my back. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the steering wheel. My fingers wouldn't move. My thoughts blurred into a slideshow of memories. Rowan proposing, Vera crying at our wedding, the 3 of us eating Sunday dinner just last month. It wasn't a single betrayal. It was an operation, a campaign. And I had handed them the map. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and fumbled to open the voice recorder. My thumb hit the red button just in time to catch Rowan's voice again. "The timing's perfect," he said. "She's been too distracted to question it." "God, she still thinks we're close," Vera added, her tone dripping with sugar and venom. "I could slap her and she'd apologize." The recorder kept going. So did they. When I finally found the strength to look up, I saw them stepping out onto the porch together. Rowan was smiling, his easy, practiced grin, Vera was laughing, touching her stomach like she was in a commercial for prenatal vitamins. I ducked lower in my seat, tears streaking down my cheeks. That was the moment it broke, not my heart. That had cracked long ago under the weight of years spent trying to be the good sister, the accommodating wife, the quiet one. What shattered was my illusion that I was loved for who I was. I wasn't. I was useful. I was trusting. I was a signature waiting to be forged, and I had almost given it to them willingly. I held my phone tighter, still recording, still catching every whispered dig, every financial scheme, every smirk. I didn't know yet what I would do, but I knew one thing for sure. They'd mistaken my silence for stupidity. They were about to find out what it really meant. I didn't even close the front door behind me. I just stood there for a moment, my back to the frame, my keys dangling loosely in one hand, my phone in the other. My shoes felt too tight, and the air in the hallway clung to my skin. I hadn't realized how much I was sweating until I touched my forehead and came away damp. The house was quiet, too quiet. No TV, no laundry running, no Rowan, just silence, and the echo of what I had just heard outside Vera's window. I walked toward the kitchen and dropped my purse on the counter. It hit harder than I meant it to. I took a shaky breath, trying to remember the last time I had felt truly safe in my own home. The house felt the same, but everything inside me was rearranged, and suddenly, I needed to see the documents. I went to the drawer near my desk, the one where I kept the random paperwork Vera had given me. I remembered the folder exactly, cream-colored. She'd handed it to me just last week with her usual soft smile. "I just need your signature on something minor," she'd said, resting one hand on her belly, the other brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's about Dad's estate stuff. The lawyer said it's just admin. You're listed as co-owner on some properties, and since I'm handling everything while I'm on bed rest..." It hadn't felt aggressive, just familiar. Vera always made things sound easy, reasonable, like saying no would make me the difficult one. Back then, I nodded. "Of course," I'd said. "Just let me take a look at it when I get home." I never did. Until now. I slid the folder out and walked it over to the dining table. I pulled out each sheet, laid them in a row. The title at the top read, "Authorization of Property Administration and Full Control Transfer." That phrase should have stopped me cold, but the first time I saw it, I skimmed right over it. Trust makes you blind in the places you should squint. Now, I read every word. My eyes stopped on the clause in bold near the bottom of the third page. By signing, the undersigned agrees to permanently and irrevocably transfer all rights, titles, and decision-making authority regarding jointly inherited assets to the listed administrator. Vera's name, my name, at the signature line. I blinked. Everything inside me recoiled at once. I had almost signed this. And if I had followed that familiar pattern of keeping peace, of nodding and smiling, my name would have been gone from every property our father left us. Every asset, every decision, every trace of my role in our family legacy would have been reduced to a memory and a signature in ink. I leaned back in the chair, heart pounding. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was Rowan. I remembered asking him the night Vera handed me that folder. We were in the kitchen. I was rinsing berries. He was opening wine. "Hey," I'd said, "Vera gave me some estate stuff to sign." "You didn't look at any of that with her, right? She said the lawyer said it was all standard." He hadn't even looked up. "Nope," he said casually. "But if it helps her get things done, I say just sign and move on. You've got enough on your plate, babe." That had felt like concern then. Now it felt like betrayal. He knew. Of course he knew. He had encouraged me to sign, to get it over with. He had looked me in the eye and lied. I stood up, my stomach turning. I walked to the sink, poured a glass of water, but didn't drink it. I was shaking. I pulled out my phone and opened the text chain with Vera. Scrolled up. "A week ago. Hey, you're such a lifesaver. Thanks for always helping out with this boring legal stuff." 2 weeks ago. "Can you come by Thursday morning? I'd feel better if you looked it over before signing. I know you're smarter with paperwork than me." Smart. That's what they needed me to be. Smart enough to get them what they wanted. But not smart enough to catch on. I stared at the folder again. Then I snapped photos of each page, saved them to a cloud folder I labeled For Now. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my father's old filing cabinet in the back room, the one he made me promise to keep intact after his funeral. I hadn't touched it since. It took me a while to find the envelope. But I did. A copy of his will. The original, not the scanned one Vera had printed and selectively quoted. The wording was clear. Joint ownership. Equal say. No transfers allowed without dual consent. I exhaled sharply. They knew this. They counted on me never reading it. I checked the clock. 5:42 p.m. Rowan wouldn't be home for another hour. I closed everything, locked the file drawer, and washed my hands. When he walked in later, I didn't say anything. I didn't ask how his meeting went. I didn't confront him. I watched him. How he dropped his keys in the bowl. How he smiled, almost absent-mindedly. How he kissed my cheek like we were still two people building a life together. And maybe I smiled back. I think I did. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. I was already preparing for the next move. I was 10 years old when she first threw me under the bus. That night, after Rowan had come home like nothing had happened, after I'd sat across from him at dinner, nodding at his small talk and smiling through my nausea, I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed, the ceiling fan rotating with lazy indifference above me, each turn clicking like a metronome counting down the seconds I couldn't get back. I kept thinking about that folder, about the clause, about how close I'd come to signing it, and how familiar that moment had felt, not in its specifics, but in the weight of it. That sense of walking into a trap set by someone I was supposed to trust, someone who, if the world were fair, should have been protecting me. That's when the memory came back. Not gently, it slammed into me like a wave crashing against a breakwater, one that had been eroding for years. It was summer. I was 10. Vera was 13 and always knew how to cry on command. Mom had just brought back this blue and white porcelain vase from New Orleans. It wasn't an heirloom or anything, but she was in love with it, kept it on a little table in the hallway, right under the mirror. She'd told us not to touch it at least a dozen times. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of lemonade when I heard the crash, the kind of sound that made your stomach drop before your brain even caught up. When I got to the hallway, Vera was standing over the shattered pieces, hands shaking, eyes already welling up. She turned toward me just as Mom appeared behind me. "She did it, Mama," Vera sobbed, pointing at me. "Astara knocked it over!" I remember standing there, stunned. I hadn't even been in the room. But I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mouth wouldn't open. Mom looked disappointed, but not surprised. "I asked you not to touch it," she said, not unkindly, but firm. "Go to your room. You're not going with us to the movies tonight." I remember nodding and walking upstairs. I didn't even cry. I just sat on my bed and stared at the floor, trying to figure out why Vera would do that, why Mom believed her without a second thought, and why I didn't defend myself. That was the first time I learned that silence makes me easier to live with. And now, decades later, here I was, still the same girl standing in the hallway, blamed for something I didn't do, punished for someone else's mess. Except this time, the stakes weren't movie night. They were everything. I got out of bed and paced the hallway. It was almost midnight, but I wasn't tired. I was wired. That kind of jittery, skin-on-fire energy that you only feel when your heart is trying to outthink your head. I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered on the third ring. "Astara? Everything okay?" Her voice was sleepy but not concerned. Never concerned. I needed to ask you something," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. "Do you really think Vera would never lie to you?" There was a pause. "Where's this coming from?" she asked cautiously. "She gave me some paperwork," I said, carefully avoiding specifics. "Legal documents about Dad's estate." I started reading it more closely. There were things in there that didn't make sense. Rowan's been involved too. I waited. "You're reading too much into it," she said flatly. "Vera's pregnant, for God's sake. She's doing the best she can." "I'm not saying she's not," I replied, forcing calm into my tone. But I have reasons to think, no, to know that she and Rowan are working together on something behind my back. You've always been too sensitive, she cut in. You imagine these things, Astara. You get worked up, and then you make a big deal out of nothing. You need to calm down. There it was. Not denial. Dismissal. I swallowed hard, but the words burned going down. Mom, I'm not 10 anymore. Well, then start acting like it, she snapped, suddenly wide awake. This kind of drama is exhausting. I didn't hang up on her. I just let the silence stretch until she did. When the call ended, I stood there in the dark kitchen, phone still in hand, staring at the wall. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I walked to the table, pulled out my laptop, and opened the folder again. I read every page, every clause, every subtle change in phrasing. I highlighted terms. I searched the county clerk website. I even pulled up articles on financial fraud and property disputes. My mind was racing, not with panic, but with planning. They wanted me quiet. I would give them silence, but not the kind they expected. I would not scream. I would not plead. I would not beg anyone to believe me. I would gather facts. I would assemble truth. I would hold every word, every file, every whisper like a loaded weapon, not because I wanted war, but because I finally understood what it meant to defend myself. No one else was going to, not Rowan, not Vera, and definitely not my mother. I opened a blank note and typed the first line, timeline of events, then another, proof of intent, another, voice recording, 3:12 p.m. Vera, when she signs, we take it all. I typed until my fingers cramped. I organized every shred of evidence. I created a folder and labeled it, just in case. The irony didn't escape me. I used to be the one who always gave the benefit of the doubt, the one who said, maybe she didn't mean it like that, or maybe he's just stressed, or family fights, it's normal. But none of this was normal. None of it was accidental. This was a pattern, and I was done playing my part in it. They want me quiet. I will give them silence, but not the kind they expect. It was just past 8 a.m. The following morning, when I finally pushed myself out of bed, I hadn't really slept, more like floated in and out of uneasy half-dreams where voices whispered through locked doors, and I kept finding pens I couldn't hold steady enough to sign anything. I wrapped a sweater around myself even though it wasn't cold, and padded barefoot down the hallway into the kitchen. The morning light slid across the tiles in long streaks, and for a second, the house looked exactly the same as it always had. But nothing was the same. While the coffee brewed, I opened my laptop at the kitchen island and logged into the joint checking account Rowan and I had opened 7 years ago. Back then, we had one of those cheesy arguments about whose last name should be on the primary profile. He insisted it didn't matter, that what was his was mine. It was the kind of thing that felt romantic at the time. Equal footing, shared future. Now I scrolled through the list of recent transactions and felt something sour rise in my throat. $200 to an OB/GYN clinic I didn't recognize. $750 labeled household cash. $960 to prenatal home wellness. They all had Rowan's initials attached in the notes. He was the one who authorized each transfer. Some of them dated back weeks, right around the time Vera's belly really began to show. I clicked on each one, tracking where the money went. The final destination for 3 of them, an account labeled under VI Kasner. My fingers paused on the keyboard. VI Vera Isolda. They weren't just plotting. They were draining me, slowly, like siphoning gas from a tank while pretending to share the ride. I didn't cry. I printed the statements, one by one, sliding them into a manila folder. I wrote financial across the top in thick black marker. After I placed the folder into my bag, I grabbed my phone and opened the group chat with my closest friends, the women who had stood beside me at my wedding, the ones who had cradled wine glasses and whispered their secrets over countless weekends. I typed out a simple message. Hey, has anyone seen Rowan and Vera together recently? Just curious. Something feels off. I stared at it for a moment, then hit send. The bubbles appeared, indicating someone was typing, then disappeared, then returned. Finally, a reply from Sarah. Astara, are you okay? You've seemed off lately. Maybe talk to someone? No one else responded. Not even Emma, who always overshared about everything. I scrolled back through the thread just to be sure. A message popped up from 2 days earlier, one I'd somehow missed during all the chaos. It was a post Vera had shared. A photo of herself standing in her kitchen, smiling with her hand on her bump. Her hair curled perfectly, her caption even more polished. Pregnancy hormones are hard enough. Add a jealous little sister with boundary issues. Pray for us. Below the caption were heart emojis, prayer hands, even a laughing face, all from the same women I'd leaned on for years. My stomach clenched. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen, holding my phone like it was a ticking bomb. She wasn't just stealing from me, she was rewriting me. In her version, I was the unstable one, the bitter, dramatic sister, the one who couldn't handle change, who lashed out when things didn't revolve around her. I deleted the group chat, not in anger, not in sadness, in clarity. They had chosen sides without ever hearing mine. That was their right, and this was mine. Later that afternoon, I drove to the bank. I didn't make an appointment. I walked straight to the service desk and asked to speak with someone about account security. The woman, early 50s, polite but alert, led me into a small glass office. I sat across from her, hands folded tightly in my lap. "I'd like to open a new account," I said, "in my maiden name. And I need to remove my name from any joint permissions with Rowan Kastner." She blinked. "All of them?" "Yes," I replied, steady. "Every single one." By the time I walked out 45 minutes later, I had a new debit card, 2 new folders of paperwork, and an overwhelming sense of quiet power humming in my chest. I drove home with the windows down, letting the wind whip my hair across my face. The sun was still up, but the light was starting to shift, the way it does when the day finally exhales. Back at the house, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and walked into the guest room that doubled as my home office. I sat at the desk and pulled out a yellow legal pad. At the top, I wrote in all caps, "Next steps." Underneath, print all bank statements. Find estate lawyer from Dad's will. Secure digital backups. Verify who notarized Vera's document. Separate accounts fully from Rowan. Create timeline of Vera's manipulation. I didn't stop to check my phone. I didn't think about what Rowan might say if he came home and found the kitchen clean and quiet, but colder somehow. I didn't wonder how Vera would spin this next, because I was done reacting. I was building. They had told me my whole life to calm down, to stop making waves, to be the one who kept things easy. But quiet isn't peace, and I wasn't going to keep buying the lie that family means letting yourself be used. I'd been the glue for too long, the one who smoothed things over, who looked away, who bit her tongue so everyone else could sleep easy. Not anymore. They made me the villain in their story. Now I would become the narrator of my own. I didn't just stumble into evidence. I was handed a weapon disguised as a lifeline. It was late Wednesday morning when I saw her voicemail. I'd missed the call the night before while staring at spreadsheets and voice memos, each one labeled with some variation of evidence or timeline or don't delete. When I finally tapped play, Elora's voice filled the room, calm but unmistakably urgent. "Hey, sweetheart, I found something you might want to look at. It's about your father's will. Call me when you can." She didn't say much more, and she didn't need to. By noon, we were sitting in the corner booth of an old cafe just off East 6th, the same place she and Dad used to meet when they wanted to talk without Mom knowing. The windows rattled slightly every time a bus passed, and the booth's vinyl was cracked where sunlight always hit. It felt right. Elora slid a folded envelope across the table, worn around the edges, yellowing at the creases. I didn't open it immediately. I just looked at her, silently asking the question she already knew was coming. "It's the original," she said, "not the copy Vera handed you. Your dad gave it to me after the final revision. Said he didn't trust how things would be handled." My hands trembled only slightly as I unfolded it. His handwriting was still there at the bottom, next to the notary's signature. The ink looked faded, but it was his, always his. No asset may be transferred, sold, or restructured without the consent of Astara Marin. The sentence stared back at me like a rescue boat in a storm. He had known. Even back then, he'd sensed it. Something in the dynamic, the tilt of favoritism, the way Mom always excused Vera's manipulations as just sibling things. I looked up at Alora. "Why didn't you give this to me sooner?" Her smile was sad. "Because I was hoping I'd never have to." I nodded slowly, tucking the document carefully into my bag. That afternoon, around 3:15 p.m., I found myself standing at Vera's front door. I didn't plan on going there. I'd been driving with no real direction when my car seemed to turn on its own. I told myself I was just going to ask for clarity, to hear her out one more time. But what I really wanted was to see her face when she realized the game was changing. The spare key was still under the blue ceramic frog by her front steps. I hadn't used it in over a year, but she never moved it. I let myself in quietly, calling out, "Vera?" once, just loud enough to seem polite. No answer. I stepped inside. The house smelled like baby powder and eucalyptus, her signature scent, curated for brand deals and baby blog aesthetics. On the kitchen counter sat a half-opened leather folder. I didn't go rifling through drawers. I didn't snoop. I looked. Carefully. Inside the folder was a notebook, lined pages filled with lists and scribbles in Vera's all-caps handwriting. I recognized it from our childhood homework sheets and birthday banners. The entries were surgical. May 10. Astara trusts me again. Good sign. June. Push signature before Rowan's birthday. Convince her it's a favor. Use Mom if needed. Keep Rowan close. Avoid suspicion. Secure joint access to Astara's account for contingency. Each line a small betrayal, each phrase a bullet point in a quiet war I hadn't even known I was losing. I took out my phone, snapped photos page by page, making sure to capture everything. My hands were steady now, mechanical. There was no rage, just focus. She'd made this personal. She had always made it personal. I locked up behind me and drove home without turning on the radio. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt loaded. Later that evening, just after 8 p.m., I sat on the edge of my bed and dialed Vera's number. She answered on the third ring, her tone light and bubbly. "Hey, sis, everything okay?" "Don't ever ask me to sign anything again," I said calmly. "Don't speak to me like I'm confused, and if you think I'm bluffing, try me." There was a pause. Then her voice came, honey-sweet and laced with condescension. "Astara, what are you talking about? You sound paranoid." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I ended the call and stared at my phone for a moment before turning to my laptop. I opened a new cloud folder and labeled it War Chest. Inside it, I uploaded everything: the notarized will, the bank statements, the notebook photos. I added voice notes with timestamps and cross-referenced memos. I wasn't making threats. I was building an arsenal. They still thought I was too soft to strike, that I'd either cave out of loyalty or crumble out of fear. That was their last miscalculation. Because now I had the truth in black and white. And the truth, unlike people, doesn't lie. It wasn't about what they stole anymore. It was about what I had left to protect. Friday morning arrived with an eerie calm, the kind that makes you feel like something is holding its breath. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I slipped into jeans, tied my hair back, and drove across town to a private women's clinic that offered discreet services, no frills, no questions. I'd scheduled the appointment under a pseudonym the day before, using a burner email. I didn't want anyone tracing my request, especially not Rowan. The clinic was small, clean, and quiet, just 3 women in the waiting room, heads bowed over their phones. The nurse who greeted me didn't ask why I needed prenatal DNA verification tied to a man who wasn't listed as a partner. She just handed me the clipboard, walked me to a small, sterile room, and took 2 swabs from the envelope I handed her. One from a paternity test Rowan and I did years ago, just for fun, the other from a sample Vera had left in a prenatal testing kit for her social media sponsor, which I had quietly acquired. I waited for the results for 4 days. They called that Tuesday afternoon while I was on the porch, pruning the herb planter that had started to die in the heat. The woman's voice was calm, professional. "We received both samples, Miss Marin. The test shows a 99.9% probability that the male DNA sample is the biological match to the fetus." I didn't thank her. I didn't gasp. I didn't even blink. I said, "Understood," and ended the call. The phone stayed in my hand for a while, screen gone dark. My other hand returned to the rosemary bush, snipping its browning edges like the news hadn't just rearranged the last remnants of my marriage. I wasn't the betrayed wife. I was the discarded placeholder, the silent partner in a love story I hadn't even known was being rewritten. That evening, Rowan came home late. He kissed me on the cheek the way men do when they want to keep the appearance of normalcy. I offered a small smile and handed him a glass of water. Dinner was already cleaned up. I had eaten alone, like I often did these days, pretending I preferred it that way. He walked into the living room, tossing his briefcase on the couch. "Long day," he said, flopping into his usual spot. "Budget meeting ran over." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked over to the dining table and placed a white envelope in front of him. I said nothing. He raised an eyebrow, reached for it casually, and tore it open. It took him less than 10 seconds to understand what it was. He chuckled, actually chuckled. "You really had someone test her? That's paranoid, Astara." I tilted my head slightly, watching him. "No," I said. "That's strategic." His smirk faltered. "You underestimate me," I added. He set the paper down slowly. His face twitched, just once. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "I'm correcting the proportions," I replied. We stared at each other for a long moment. For once, he had nothing slick to say. No speech about how I was overthinking things. No dismissive arm around my shoulder. And that silence, that crack in his armor, was everything I needed. He didn't know I had already opened a new bank account under my maiden name. He didn't know I had hired a forensic accountant from Alora's recommendation. He didn't know that every document, every transfer, every notarized lie they'd forged was already being prepared by my lawyer, Ellis Cade, and I had no intention of giving him a single warning. Later that night, while he showered, I walked into the home office and retrieved the manila envelope from the drawer marked Insurance. Inside it was the original will from Dad, the printouts from my bank statements, and a notarized letter from the financial advisor confirming suspicious activity across multiple accounts linked to Rowan and Vera. I tucked everything neatly inside, closed the flap, and sealed it shut. The next morning, I waited until he left for work, some bogus team-building retreat that I didn't bother to ask about, and drove straight to Ellis's law firm. His office was just off Congress Avenue, tucked between a real estate office and a yoga studio. I didn't make an appointment. His receptionist, Lisa, looked up as I walked in. "Miss Marin?" "I'm here to file," I said. "Today." She blinked once, then nodded. "I'll let him know." Ellis stepped out of his office minutes later, his glasses pushed up on his head, legal pad in one hand. "You're ready?" I held out the envelope. "Let's dissolve this quietly," I said, "but thoroughly." He smiled, tight-lipped, professional. "We'll make it clean." We sat for half an hour, reviewing paperwork, establishing dates, formalizing language. No drama, no tears. Rowan's betrayal didn't deserve emotion. It deserved paperwork. On my way home, I didn't feel powerful or proud. I felt clear. That clarity stayed with me into the evening. I cooked a small dinner, played old jazz records in the background, and cleaned the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had accepted reality. Rowan came home just after 9, loosened tie, smiling like he had something charming to say. He leaned against the fridge. "You're quiet tonight." I looked at him, really looked at him. A man who had once held my dreams in his hands like fragile porcelain. A man who had broken them without flinching. "I'm done," I said simply. His brow furrowed. "Done with what?" "You. Her. All of it," he scoffed, walking toward me. "You're throwing away everything over what? A baby that's not yours? Some crossed wires?" "No," I said. "You already threw it away." He froze. "I'm just the one finishing it." And I walked out of the kitchen. The last thing I did that night was email Ellis a scanned copy of the signed dissolution papers. Attached was the subject line. "Ready to serve." Truth doesn't need an invitation. It just shows up, usually when you've run out of lies. 3 days after I filed for divorce, I got a text from my mother. "Family dinner, everyone. Sunday. No excuses. No emojis, no questions, just a command." I stared at it for a moment, then turned the phone face down. I already knew what this was, a cleanup meeting. A carefully orchestrated intervention disguised as a casserole-filled reconciliation. Delphine's version of damage control. She always worried more about how it looked than how it was. Still, I said yes, because I wanted to look her in the eye. Sunday came too quickly, as Sundays often do when you dread them. I arrived 10 minutes early and parked a few houses down. Delphine's driveway was already full. My Uncle Ray's truck, Cousin Marie's dusty sedan, and of course, Rowan's Acura, parked smugly at the curb like it belonged. I walked in carrying nothing. The dining room was already buzzing. Vera was at the head of the table, practically glowing in a cream dress that hugged her stomach. She looked like she was posing for a maternity photo shoot, all softness and sacred energy. Her hand rested dramatically on her belly. Her other hand clutched a glass of water like it was a wine glass at a gala. Rowan stood behind her chair, nodding to people as if he were still part of this family. My mother floated between dishes like a hostess from some Southern Living magazine, smiling, directing, clinking silverware just a bit too loudly. The moment I stepped in, conversation dropped by half a volume. "Look who's here," Vera said sweetly, all teeth. "We were beginning to worry." "I'm sure you were," I replied, placing my purse on the chair beside me, but staying standing. Delphine rushed over, air-kissed my cheek. "Let's not bring tension into this, okay? We're all here to talk like adults." I smiled at her, a tight, measured thing. "Great, let's talk." Everyone took their seats, but I remained standing. Vera's voice floated across the table like a well-rehearsed line. "I know you're going through a lot, Astara. I really do. But dragging family into court? That's not love. That's cruelty." Murmurs rippled around the table. Cousin Marie nodded sympathetically. Uncle Ray looked down into his iced tea. Even Aunt Jan, who always played devil's advocate, remained silent. Vera clasped her hands dramatically, the image of the wounded matriarch in waiting. I never wanted this to get ugly, especially with the baby coming. I let the silence stretch. I let her soak in her applause. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened a screenshot. "I think," I said, voice steady, "it's time we let the facts speak." I held the phone up for everyone to see. This was sent to me, accidentally. Rowan meant to send it to Vera. I read it aloud. "I can't sleep without your breath on my neck. You're glowing. My future is glowing inside you." The room froze. You could hear the tick of the kitchen clock. Someone inhaled too sharply. Marie dropped her fork. Vera's face drained of color. Her hands dropped to her lap. Rowan stiffened, but didn't speak. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "Did you want to explain who he was writing about? Or should we just connect the dots?" Delphine stood abruptly. "Astara, this isn't the place." "No," I cut in. "This is exactly the place. You asked us to come here. You wanted peace. But peace without truth is just performative silence." Vera blinked rapidly, then let out a low gasp. I think I'm fainting," she whispered. Rowan moved toward her, but I didn't. Neither did anyone else. It was Marie, of all people, who spoke first. "Oh, come on." Vera looked up, startled. "You used the baby to hide behind your lies," Marie said, voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "That's messed up." Carmela stood too, rushing forward. "Give her space. She needs air." "She's fine," came another voice. Aunt Jan, the retired nurse. Jan moved forward, placed 2 fingers on Vera's wrist. "Pulse is steady, breathing normal, no signs of distress. This isn't a fainting spell, it's theater." Gasps now, real ones. Vera pulled her hand away like it burned. "You're accusing a pregnant woman of faking?" she hissed. "You're accusing your sister of insanity," I replied. "So, yes, we're all playing the same game now." Delphine turned to me, voice cold. "You've made your point. Enough." "No," I said. "Not yet." I stepped closer, voice calm. "Mom, you raised us to care about appearances, to keep things inside so the neighbors wouldn't know. But what about what I know, what I've lived?" Her jaw tightened. You wanted peace? Silence isn't peace. This, I gestured around the table. This is just the beginning of truth. No one said anything. Vera sat frozen, chest rising and falling too evenly for someone claiming distress. Rowan looked at the door like he might bolt. I turned to Delphine one last time. Next week, I said quietly, we meet in court, and that won't be fainting room safe. Then I picked up my purse and walked out without another word. Courtrooms don't need microphones to echo. They just need the right story to unfold. A week later, I stood outside the Travis County Family Court building in a fitted navy dress and low heels, not to impress, but to look like I wasn't there to be pitied. My hair was pulled back, makeup minimal, not out of strategy, just clarity. I didn't want to look like someone clinging to something that had already let go of me. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Wooden benches creaked under shifting weight. The air carried that sterile scent of old paperwork and over-polished wood. It wasn't packed, but enough people had shown up. Cousins, in-laws, a few mutual friends, even Delphine, who sat near the back in a too-tight blazer that hadn't seen daylight since Dad's funeral. Vera sat at the front, draped in beige, like she was playing the part of the noble mother under siege. Her hands caressed her belly like it was a shield. Rowan was next to her, dressed in a suit that fit too well for a man pretending to be stressed. He glanced at me once. Just once. Then looked away. Their lawyer, a man with the charm of a weatherman and the spine of a soggy napkin, stood tall and smug as he addressed the judge. Your Honor, our client has suffered emotional harassment, character defamation, and public humiliation. What Miss Marin is doing is not justice, it's vengeance. I didn't flinch. Ellis Cade, my attorney, stood slowly and adjusted his glasses. He had the patience of someone who had seen too many liars trip over their own words. With respect, Your Honor, what my client has done is bring evidence, receipts, documents, recordings, all of which tell a very different story. The judge, a woman in her 60s with eyes sharp enough to cut through granite, raised a brow. Proceed. And so he did. He began with the audio clip. The one where Vera's voice spilled out casually through the courtroom speaker. When she signs, we take it all. She won't even see it coming. Gasps broke across the room like small fires. Ellis didn't pause. He followed it with screenshots, text exchanges between Vera and Rowan. Then came the notebook entries, projected onto a screen. Keep Rowan close. Avoid suspicion. Push for signature by June. Use mom if needed. Remove Astara from accounts quietly. The financial documents were next. Transfer records, digital trails of shared funds rerouted into private accounts. Then, the DNA results, printed in bold, 99.9% match. Rowan, the father of Vera's baby. Finally, Ellis placed the original will on the evidence table. The one with Dad's signature and the clause that tied every asset to my name unless I signed otherwise. I sat there, silent. They built a castle of lies, I thought. I brought receipts. Vera began to squirm, whispering to Rowan. His jaw clenched. I watched his lips move. Don't say anything. The judge turned to her. Miss Isolde, do you have a rebuttal? Vera opened her mouth, then paused. She blinked several times, touched her stomach, and whispered, I think something's wrong. The bailiff moved forward. The judge didn't look impressed. I'm calling for medical, Vera began, but she didn't finish. A nurse from the courthouse staff approached quickly, took her pulse, checked her eyes. After a short pause, she turned to the judge. No signs of labor, pulse normal, no elevated stress indicators. She's not in physical distress. A hush fell again, but it was different this time. The sympathy in the room drained like water down a cracked sink. Someone in the back whispered, She faked it? The judge didn't blink. Continue. Rowan shifted uncomfortably. Vera sat frozen, her mouth still slightly open. It was the sound of exposure, the kind that no one claps for. By the end of the hearing, the verdict came fast. The judge ruled that Vera was to be removed from all estate management responsibilities, effective immediately. Rowan's access to all shared marital accounts was frozen pending a financial investigation. My divorce petition was granted fast-track status, and custody of Vera's unborn child postponed until an ethics review could be completed. The gavel dropped with a sharp, final thud. Delphine didn't speak a word the entire time. She just sat, back straight, face flushed with a shame she couldn't redirect this time. After the courtroom cleared out, I stepped into the hall to breathe. The hallway buzzed with whispered commentary. People avoided my eyes. Some offered small nods of respect. Others couldn't look at me. Then Vera approached. Her voice was low, venom-laced. "I'll make sure that baby never knows your name." I turned to her. My voice didn't rise. I didn't lean in. "That's fine," I said. "But she'll know mine's the reason she's not raised by liars." I walked away before she could answer. Because sometimes, silence is the last word. Some endings don't tie with ribbons. They close like doors with locks you never open again. 6 months passed faster than I expected. Or maybe time just stops meaning the same thing when you're no longer bracing for the next lie. I had traded my old house in the suburbs for a modest apartment overlooking Lady Bird Lake. Nothing fancy, just enough space for me, my peace, and a coffee table that didn't have memories baked into its wood grain. The morning sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, landing softly on the hardwood floor. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, sipping coffee from a chipped mug I refused to throw away. Not because of sentiment, but because it was mine, and no one ever touched it. I had just returned from signing a new consulting contract, my third in 2 months. Turns out when you stop carrying the emotional weight of everyone else's comfort, you have space to build something real. My business was growing, word of mouth, small clients, mostly women-owned firms, referrals from Alora's network. I didn't need to win big. I just needed to stand on something that hadn't been handed to me like a leash. Freedom doesn't roar. It hums. Quiet, low, steady. And in that quiet, I learned how to breathe again. Vera lost custody the month after the hearing. Not that she ever had it fully. The court granted her visitation twice a month, supervised. Her appeal was denied. She blamed stress, blamed me, blamed the system. But she never once apologized. Rowan was let go from his firm after an internal ethics investigation wrapped up. Apparently, using company time and resources to manipulate financial accounts doesn't look great in quarterly reports. Last I heard, he moved in with a friend in North Austin and was figuring things out. Carmela left 2 voicemails on my work line. "I know I was wrong," the second one said. "If you ever need anything, I'm here." I didn't call back. Forgiveness doesn't always require reunion. Sometimes it just means you stop bleeding when someone says your name. I hadn't seen Vera face-to-face since court, but I felt her presence in small ways. Indirect glances from family friends at the grocery store, a cousin's half-hearted Facebook message I didn't answer. They were still trying to understand which version of the story to believe. I stopped needing them to. Last weekend, I was invited to speak at a local women's leadership event. Alora nominated me. The keynote panel was titled, "Silence Isn't Peace, Reclaiming Your Voice After Betrayal." I stood on stage in a navy wrap dress, my hair swept back, microphone in hand. The auditorium wasn't massive, but it was full. Older women, younger women, a few with notepads, a few with tears in their eyes before I even opened my mouth. I didn't give them a TED Talk. I told them a story. I told them about how manipulation doesn't always come wrapped in red flags. Sometimes it comes with birthday cards and casseroles. Sometimes it's the sister you grew up sharing bunk beds with, the man you thought would grow old beside you. Sometimes it's your own mother's voice saying, "Don't cause drama." I talked about the cost of being the easy one, the burden of carrying family peace at the expense of personal truth. And I told them about that day in court, about how silence broke, not with shouting, but with evidence. With receipts, with the calm voice of a woman who had finally decided to stop explaining herself. They stood when I finished. It wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the stillness right before it. The breath everyone held when I said, "Not all battles look like wars. Some look like signatures. Some look like silence." As I stepped off stage, I saw her. Vera, back row. Alone. No baby in sight. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. She just watched. I didn't acknowledge her, because her presence didn't define my power anymore. That night, I returned to my apartment and poured myself a glass of red wine. I lit a candle, not out of ritual, but because the room deserved softness. Then I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a picture. Me, Vera, and Dad. Christmas, maybe 1993. Vera had tinsel in her hair. I had a chocolate smudge on my shirt. Dad looked tired, but he was smiling like it still mattered to him that we were close. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I placed it back, closed the box, and slid it into the back of the closet. Some things aren't meant to be on display. As I watered the plant by my window, a gift from my first client, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. It was from an unknown number. "She'll want to meet you someday. I just hope she meets the version of you that kept fighting." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I knew who it was from. And I knew that when that day came, if it ever did, there'd be nothing left to explain. Only the quiet truth of who I became after they tried to erase me. At the end of the day, this story isn't just about betrayal, it's about resilience. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who cut the deepest, but the choice to stand, to fight quietly with truth, is what sets us free. What would you do if the very people you trusted most plotted against you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next powerful story.